consisting of 3 professors, one emeritus professor, Kurt Michael. Can I have the stick, please?
Yeah, what do I...
Is it...
How can I make it display?
You want to display it for... I don't think it matters.
It doesn't matter, okay.
That matters. Just
All right,
I'll just scroll down.
Okay.
So, yeah. I arrived 9 years ago, just over 9 years ago. The senior member of our group is Professor Liang. She's the head of the high energy astrophysics group. We have Kurt Michael, emeritus professor, specialist in neutron star studies over, well, since they were discovered, basically, in 1967. And Ian Smith is a faculty fellow. I haven't got any slides from Ian, but he works on gamma ray bursts, and he works specifically on the afterglows. That's where his focus is, optical detections. He has worked on neutron star physics with Professor Michael and a number of other things in the past, but right now he's working on detecting optical afterglows with a telescope on Haleakala in Hawaii, in Maui. So we'll go through mostly Edison's, Giovanni's, and myself. The research. High energy astrophysics is a lot of fun to play with because if you like relativity, quantum mechanics, you like electromagnetism, you get to general relativity, you get to sort of play with these, they're like fun physics to put together in a lot of our problems. High energy astrophysics means anything above the optical UV wavelength. It can include, because we have to get lots of information from out there in the sky, from lots of different wavelengths. So our predominant information is from X-ray and gamma ray telescopes, which by necessity, because of the absorption of the atmosphere, have to be out in space. So yes, we can scroll on. I will go along to Dr. Liang's. So we all overlap. Okay, our principal objects, if you look at it, are mostly accreting black holes, pulsars, gamma ray bursts. So accreting black holes are just exactly, they come in 2 main varieties, and that is the galactic sources, which are around solar mass, and they're the result of the first main sequence of, they're basically stars that die and go supernova, and they end up producing black holes. Typically they have to start off with more than 10 solar masses in order to end up being a black hole. And these black holes suck in matter, and that's what we call accretion, and they emit X-rays, ultraviolet light, and sometimes gamma rays. Pulsars are neutron stars that rotate very fast, typically around a tenth of a second is their period, and they spit off a lot of radiation. Most of them we see in radio waves, but now we've got a lot of gamma ray pulsars being produced, being detected by NASA's new gamma ray mission called Fermi, with which I'm affiliated. Okay, gamma ray bursts are potentially neutron stars that merge, or stars, massive stars that blow up, and they're the remnants. They create this very exotic, perhaps a black hole down in the center, we don't know for sure, and then they blast out material relativistically. Okay, now we mean relativistically, we don't mean at a tenth of the speed of light, or half the speed of light. The material we measure is traveling with a Lorentz factor, a bulk Lorentz factor of about 1,000. That's what we're currently getting of the Fermi detections of gamma ray bursts. So Dr. Liang is working on plasma astrophysics related to this, and then he's dealing with, so there's a theory, he's a theorist, and so he also does some simulational work, mostly sort of plasma simulations, what we call particle and cell codes, but also magnetohydrodynamic, which is you're dealing with the tangling of magnetic fields and electric fields, and the plasma physics associated with that. And we have this observational push, experimental lab push, where you get ultra-intense lasers, so-called petawatt lasers, and try to create electron-positron paired plasmas, which is what we believe is producing gamma ray burst emission. We also think it's producing, next slide please, it's producing active galactic nuclei emission. I'll talk about that in a little bit. Okay, so this is the type of petawatt laser, so very powerful lasers, generally at national labs, not exclusively though, and the idea is that you blast them and you create a very dense plasma, very hot, and it just dissipates a lot of its energy in a beam of electron-positron pairs. So you have a thick target, and then you blast out the jet and you try to measure the properties of the electron-positron pairs. You want to know if they're totally thermal, or whether we can get some non-thermal particles, because that's what we see in astrophysics. We see a lot of this in high energy astrophysics, non-thermal emission. That means that you don't have a Maxwell-Boltzmann distribution. You have largely a power law tail of momenta going up to very high energies. Now we're not talking We're not talking about like an MeV or a GeV. We're talking about we have evidence that electrons are produced above 1 TeV or 10 TeV or even 100 TeV in some of our sources. So these are the most energetic particles that we have in nature other than ultra-high energy cosmic rays. Okay, so that's one of the goals. Next slide, please. Another area is the MHD. This is a simulation, purely simulation, so it's not the experimental side. We're trying to sort of trying to find territory in this interdisciplinary field of where simulation work can talk to laboratory experimentation work to try to understand the structure of relativistic outflows, the makeup, the composition, and the structure. Those are the sorts of questions we want to answer. And we can't get everything from out there in the distant universe because we can't resolve it. We get very few photons, and they're there, and photons are not magnetic fields or particles. In the heliosphere, we can measure both magnetic fields and particles by putting spacecraft up there. In astrophysics, out there in the universe, we can't do that. We have to infer things from, you basically deconvolve from the radiation emission that we see. Okay? So these are MHD simulations, magnetohydrodynamic, where you follow the structures of magnetic fields. The color coding is just intensity and magnetic field, and then you convolve that with a radiation emission mechanism, for this case synchrotron radiation, and it smears it out and you see these profiles. And the idea here is to try and model relativistic outflows and see if there's collimation and what happens when it actually slams into a surrounding medium and decelerates and dissipates a lot of energy. Okay, on to the next.